Hello, Blenders, and welcome to a bonus episode of the ReelBlend podcast. A podcast whose hosts are dropping like flies, I think. I am your producer, Gabe Kovac, usually here in the background, but I'm filling in for Sean, who has fallen ill. But I am joined, and only joined, by Jake Hamilton of Fox 32 in Chicago. How's it going, buddy?
I feel like this would have been perfect for Hunger Games release, and we could have just said, hey, you know what? There can be only one.
We fought for this one. We're the champions. I'll say, so this is we're probably gonna get a lot of new viewers on this, I assume. If you're new here and you want to head right to the interview, you can check out our description for some timestamps, or if you're on YouTube, look at that little bar under the video, and it'll have little chapters for you. You can head right to that interview. No harm, no foul, but I hope you come back and enjoy. But this is not our typical format, not our typical show, and I'll jump into that for the folks who are here on the regular. Yes, as I said, Sean is sick, and he really tried really hard to do this. We thought he was going to do it even though he was out sick, but today we're recording on Monday, and I do not blame him for not being able to do it. And I'm sure you at home
I absolutely blame him.
I'm sure the folks at home don't want to see or hear a sick man through a microphone, but send him love on social.
And it's a real bummer too, just by nature of hello, hi. So we do have another co-host on the show this morning. I do Kevin. Exactly right. I do feel bad that Sean and Kevin can't participate in these episodes in particular, because these episodes where we have the sort of big interviews that we have this week really, to a certain degree, not to pat ourselves on the back, but kind of feel a little bit like victory laps. You kind of want to sort of say like, all right, it happened. We're proud of our work. Here it is. And to not be there. It's very similar to whenever I'm at my station here in Chicago and have a piece that I'm really proud of, and for some reason or another can't be there to air it. Yeah. It sucks. Like, it's not to say that like it's not going to make air and people aren't going to see it, but like you want to be there. You kind of want to enjoy the moment of like seeing other people see the stuff. So
right, yeah. As I said, we're recording on Monday, and this is releasing on Wednesday. So hopefully by the time you folks are hearing this, he feels much better and is back to it. But still, send him some love on social. Kevin, it is the holiday season. I don't even know exactly what he's doing, but it's travel season for everybody, and he's traveling. So it's a short week for us, and we have tight windows to get these in, which is why he can't be here. So hopefully he's feeling fine. Last I checked with him, he was feeling fine.
Yeah. He's all good. I think he's just probably literally in the air right now.
That is not to say that this week is not going to be awesome for the listeners at home, because we have not one, but two amazing interviews out of the Napoleon junket. Today, as you've seen in the thumbnail, as you've seen in the headline, today we are joined by Ridley Scott, director of Napoleon.
Somehow not Academy Award winner.
Soon to be, maybe. Who knows? But following him up on Friday we're going to have, Jake and I will join you again to introduce you to our interview with Joaquin Phoenix. Return guest Joaquin Phoenix, Napoleon himself, is joining ReelBlend, and we couldn't be more excited.
It's a crazy 1-2 punch.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
These guys. I never in a million years thought that we would ever have a podcast that Joaquin Phoenix would ever come on, much less come on twice. Yeah. The fact that somehow both Joaquin Phoenix and Tom Hanks and Ridley Scott and Chris Nolan are all return guests on our not just one-time guests, but return guests is pretty nuts. For
this one in particular, to give, we'll dive into some of the behind the scenes. And again, if you're not a regular listener, we like to dive into behind the scenes. Hopefully you like hearing about how junkets are done, how questions were formulated, and what we think of movies. But this is one in particular, to your point, that was surprising, because going into it, we accepted it. We were like, hell yes.
Sure.
When they asked if we would take Ridley Scott again. And at the time, it was just Ridley because there was a strike going on. And so we were like, wouldn't that be cool? But like not at all expecting, one, for the strike to be over necessarily, and two, that Joaquin Phoenix would be doing any time. And if he was, three, he would come to our podcast. That was like too many layers of if it happens. And what was wild is, like, as soon as it ended and the resume to work happened with the actors and SAG-AFTRA, it felt like it was within a day they updated that junket and they were like, Joaquin's available. Do you want him for the podcast? And we were like, yes.
And we all joked that Joaquin, who we love and has always been very kind to us and is always welcome on the show, but also famously doesn't necessarily love doing interviews. Mm-hmm. We all joked that behind the scenes, Joaquin was the one person in Hollywood that when they announced the writer's strike was over was like, son of a bitch. Now, right before I got to go do press. So you kidding me?
Yeah, I think I said he was looking for like any student film he could do to be busy. He was sorry, I'm working.
Can't do it.
Anyway, I'll quickly go through the rigmarole. We are, of course, available wherever you get podcasts, including YouTube. And so if you're listening to us and you want to see the video of Sir Ridley Scott, his handsome face, and the wonderful sense of humor that he brings to this show, you can head over to youtube.com/ReelBlend Podcast. And if you want to get the show ad-free in audio form and you want to hear from Sean every other week in his little newsletter, you can sign up for our premium feed, which is, of course, available in the description. You can follow the instructions there and join us. Jake, we've set up the interview a little bit. Before we go, if there's anything else you want to add to set the scene for the folks before we get to Ridley Scott here on the ReelBlend Podcast, how was that moment going into that before it started? And we'll pick up with you after the interview to debrief a little bit, but also to give you a review of Napoleon. So everyone stay tuned. But Jake, how was it in the room?
So I think it's safe to say that this ReelBlend interview with Ridley Scott is probably going to be one of the very few interviews you will be able to find with Ridley Scott for Napoleon. He didn't have a lot of people approved for his list for this junket. It was a very small junket. And honestly, just by nature of how junkets work, throughout the day, the list got even smaller. Sometimes it just happens. The time becomes more and more limited. We were already appreciative to be there, even more so by the time the junket ended, when we saw really how few people he actually sat down with. And here's the thing about Ridley Scott. You go in and we have never had any kind of an issue with Ridley Scott. He has always been great on our show, is welcome back anytime. But at the end of the day, he also, if you are familiar with his style of interviews, he doesn't suffer fools. He is not going to put up with anything he deems to be a stupid question. So we did all of our traditional ReelBlend, training to gear up for it. We had, dinner the night before after the screening, and we were all wiped and we were exhausted. We'd all just landed from our respective cities into Paris. But we knew that we could not go in that day without sort of being prepped and having a flow and feeling confident in the way that we were going to go with things. But walked in and instantly just the vibe was good. I think we were his first sit down on camera of the day. And honestly, I am incredibly happy with how this turned out. Here's one thing I am going to point out that I would love for you to notice that I think would be better on this side. Sean has inherited the title of Ridley Scott doesn't answer my questions.
Maybe he just has a limit. Maybe he can only be interviewed by two people.
And one guy. And we told Kevin that for Gladiator 2, it's going to be his turn.
Yeah.
So if you're unfamiliar, really quick, last time we had him on for House of Gucci, it didn't matter what I asked. He did not answer it at all. Gave great answers to questions I did not ask. And so we always laughed like he's just...
It was great quotes.
It was great sound bites. It just had nothing to do with what I asked. And so this time, Sean is the one whose questions he does not answer. So hopefully you enjoy that.
Well, that is a beautiful intro. I will not waste any more time and go ahead and throw you to the return of Sir Ridley Scott on the ReelBlend Podcast.
Personally, I was an extra on the set of Roland Emmerich's The Patriot, shot down in South Carolina.
Mel Gibson.
With Mel Gibson, I was a redcoat. I went through weeks of training to learn how to load a musket, fire it off, march and everything. So when I watch Napoleon and I see the amount of stuff going on in your backgrounds, I think of those extras. I want to know how the battle sequences have evolved from your earliest days. Is it any easier, or do you still have to go through all of those steps to make it look realistic?
No, I had the best film school ever. I did years as a major advertising director. Mm-hmm. And in those times, I think I caught the wave of, today the equivalent would be the internet. We were at the beginning of commercial television. Commercial television had to have advertising, and I caught that wave with Alan Parker and Adrian Lyne, and then later my brother, who became major at it as well. There were other directors, but we kind of led the way. And I think the advertising evolution, then it developed, it was almost like an art form. And I think we influenced France and America with what we were doing. because it adjusted and changed the way films were lit, cut, and storytelling. I can tell a story in 30 seconds, and you get a feature guy going back to advertising you can't cope with. How do you do it in 30 seconds? You can tell a story in 30 seconds. Gotcha. In fact, the Steve Jobs commercial I did for Steve was a minute. It was Orwellian. We ran it. He cleared his stock in 2 weeks. Boom.
Wow. Oh. Love that commercial, by the way.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I find interesting, and I remember Matt Damon talking about you running like 8 cameras on The Martian, and
sure.
I find this so interesting. I know you've discussed the 11 cameras aspect in one of the featurettes, but I wanted to, our podcast is designed to teach the audience about filmmaking and the way it goes down. And when you have 11 cameras rolling in an action sequence and camera operators dressed in uniforms, can you just walk us through how that looks, how you erase the cameras, and like what that does for the actors? Like,
if you're a filmmaker, don't try it. You've got to have the scene in your head as a geometric structure. So I know if he's going to walk in here, so I'm going to have camera here, going to sit down, exit. You need to have that in your head, so then you can walk in position the cameras where you're going to do it. Today it became a lot easier because I can remove a camera digitally. I can pan across the camera with a camera right there into the room, and we can remove him. Because that camera there will be maybe doing several other angles during the take. So I do everything with 4 cameras. So let's say a scene scheduled for a day, I'll be finished by 11. Done. And if a big battle is with 8 cameras, it's fundamentally kind of 8 times faster. So we did Napoleon in 61 days.
Oh my gosh.
Unbelievable.
That's incredible.
As opposed to 100. I know people who do 150. That would be 61 days.
And there's a 4-hour cut of this in 61.
But then Gladiator I'm doing right now in 52 days.
Oh my God.
But
You're faster.
it's knowing where to put your camera. And that also has to go hand in hand with a very good cameraman who can cope with those 8 angles. But, one thing is very simple about this. The key light is from one direction. And wherever you are, sometimes you'll have a front light, sometimes side, sometimes back light. So you accept that. And you can always massage a shot into looking good.
but the person you put the camera operator in a uniform?
Yes. Yes. I said, remove your matte box. Do you need a matte box, dude? And he said, no. So take the fucking matte box.
That's interesting that you refer to it as geometry, because at one point in the film, Napoleon calls it geometry.
Advertising for me was training ground, all kinds of things. It made me a very skilled filmmaker. But I discovered very early on in advertising that to be an operator is so much faster, and you get the shot you want as opposed to giving to somebody else, and it didn't quite what you want. So I started operating almost everything I did. And so the very first film, I was the only one camera on the Alien, me, one camera on Duelist. I wasn't allowed to get on camera in Hollywood because they wouldn't let me, because I did Blade Runner. Returning, only one camera on Legend, that's me. Thelma and Louise is me. So I know exactly how to use this thing. So when I suddenly decided, I can use 2, 4, 8, and I know where to squeeze them in because I'm an operator.
Yeah. So is it not 11 on this? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, it is 11. Okay, cool. I just want to make sure. Okay.
Yeah. Napoleon crossing Russia, not accounting for the weather, I feel like it's sort of just this pitch-perfect example of a guy who maybe doesn't know when to quit, when to call it, when to pull it back. And I'm sort of curious, do you have a cinematic equivalent of that? We've seen for decades the examples of moments where you've done it pitch perfectly in your success stories, but do you have a moment on set where you went, I should have quit, I should have pulled back, I went too far?
No, early on I used to get bad moments where, particularly when I was moving into multi-camera, because you got a lot of people going, and the first AD going, the cameraman going, impossible, and I go, no, you have to say, fuck this is what we're going to do. Sorry, beep, this is what we're going to do.
We had Mr. Nolan, Christopher Nolan, on our show earlier this year.
He's one camera.
He's one camera, yes.
God bless him.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and he mentioned that the moment that he realized that score could be used as a character, almost as a main character, was having listened to your commentary track for Thelma and Louise.
Yeah.
It almost opened him up to that. The music in this film is not what I was expected. It's jaunty, it has energy to it, a vibe to it. Can you just discuss what you were hoping to accomplish with the score and how it came about?
I always write score around this. If you've got a central character. You normally do. In this sense, I've got, and I hope any Corsican forgives me, but I've got a Corsican ruffian who is kind of not upper class, is not even middle class. You can't quite call him working class. Because mummy keeps her standards up and he has to, his mother dominated. And I thought that actually he's a bit of a tough guy. I was going to say thug. Not a thug, he's small, he's very can-do, and he's got a very strong, I think he must have been gifted with a marvelous intuition, had to. When you do those battle programs, that's an intuition. You're taking risks and chances, you're going, screw it, I'm going to do it. That's intuition. And the more, I think that was his strongest asset. The weaker side of him was his grace. He had no social graces, which I think is what made him fascinated with Josephine. Because Josephine, being politely we call a courtesan, knew all about the social graces of how to behave, how to address, to deal with people and manipulate people. He had none of that. He was very much in your face. And I think that was part of his need for her. I don't mean he actually said, I'm going to be with her because of that, because I think he was deeply attracted to her as well. But I think there was more than just sex in the bedroom.
Gotcha. I'm going to jump off his question because when we had Christopher Nolan on the show for Oppenheimer back in the summertime, he talked so highly of you because you asked a question about like who was Christopher Nolan's Einstein equivalent, someone that meant a lot to him, and he said Sir Ridley Scott.
Good heavens!
And that's what I wanted. So this was on our show, so I wanted to get your reaction when a filmmaker, he's a younger filmmaker, but he's obviously made up his claim in filmmaking. But when you hear about a filmmaker like that looks up to you like that, what does that mean to you? And also, like, the success of that film making almost $1 billion. Did you even see it? I was just curious, like, what that means to you.
Brings tears to my eyes.
Really?
No. But thank you, Chris.
Perfect. Thank you.
Speaking of brings tears to my eyes, I'm going to be genuine and tell you that some of my most emotional moments in a movie theater have been because of your films. The death of Maximus. I've seen the movie a million times. I watched it literally on YouTube again this morning, and it still hits me.
Don't tell him that.
I'm sorry. Well, not for the first time. It's not for the fucking first time. I've seen it a million times. Not for the first time.
Oh, God.
But I am sort of curious how your own films impact you. If you were to watch your filmography from start to finish, what is the beat in one of your movies that even though you directed it, it still hits you like an audience member?
You know what's great? They don't age. Mm-hmm. They don't age. And so... And it's frequently, because we're getting short of what I call good material on the platforms, I do this terrible thing of starting to look at my own movies. And eventually becomes the checklist. And God, that flew. And I looked at another film the other day, which I loved at the time, and I hadn't seen it for years, called Someone to Watch Over Me.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it's really good. And Tom Berenger, Mimi Rogers, it's a good film. Another thing, I think, way back when, The Duelist runs every night globally somewhere. That film cost $800,000 all in. And in those days, in America, Paramount didn't know what to do with it, so they made 7 prints. So I said to Putnam, the guy, my partner, it was my producer then, I said, is this normal? He said, no. He said, they don't like it. So there 7 prints in the US. That's it. And it won a prize at Cannes. But, in those days, to let them off the hook, it was all about big mainstream cinema. They didn't know how to release something. The real talent of Harvey Weinstein, his brother, was the low budget, what we call the art film. They knew how to release them.
We're in an age now where masters, such as yourself, and I will call you that, are able to get their streaming films into theaters.
Yeah.
Martin Scorsese was able to do it with Killers of the Flower Moon, David Fincher with The Killer. Is it as simple as you just saying, I want this?
No. I think there was a business plan with the platforms and whoever they are, and there are several, and they were growing in their plan to, I think, eliminate theater completely.
Okay.
They didn't want it. because why? It's competitive, and also they use up that material already seen before it goes to platform. I think people still rewatch things as well. So the business plan, thank God, was questioned when I believe, I may have this wrong, but I heard Tom Cruise had learned that the plan was to go stream, minimal screen, then stream. And I heard he said, absolutely not. Okay. Count me out if you're going to do that. And they went screen, and it hit $1 billion in the first month. So that was like, duh, right? then the same thing with Jim, Avatar. Now it's 2-point-something billion. Now Barbie is 2-point-something billion. So I think the screens are here to stay for the right movies. But then go to the low-budget movies. There's a very good company called A24.
Yeah.
A24. They had a small movie about a fishing boat and a guy who was deaf and dumb.
Yes.
Is that the right expression? What do you say?
Yes. Yeah.
He was afflicted. He couldn't speak. And that did very well in its own level on cinema. I mean, it cost nothing, but it made money. So the justification of putting cinema first and then go stream. And so they realized you can't match that kind of dollar streaming. You can't do it. So then, and we were on this perilous edge of going minimal screenings about 10 months ago. That's why I finished this film almost about now a year now. Okay. It was going to have the other plan. Suddenly they realized it's the wrong plan. And then they had studios bid for it, and Sony won.
Gotcha.
You know, we talk a lot about film history on our show, and I think one of the greatest movies that never got made was Stanley Kubrick's version of Napoleon. And I know that you have a history with Kubrick, I think, you know, with Alien and The Shining and things like that. And I was just curious if at all you ever thought or met with him and talked to him at all about this. I mean, I know he passed years ago, but I was just wondering what your connection was to him, and do you envision what his vision of this would have been?
No, he came to me and said, I was in the office, Alien had been out a month. Somebody said, this guy standing on the phone. I said, Stanley who? He said, Kubrick. I said, fuck off. So I go, who's this? He said, Stanley Kubrick. I went, oh, okay. He said, and he went straight in. How did you get that thing to come out of his chest? I said, wow, okay. I said, nothing about art, mechanics. How did you get that thing to come out of his chest? Because we didn't have digital effects in those days. So I started to describe, cut a hole in the table, make a fiberglass chest, stretch a T-shirt over it, razor blade it, hand device below it. He said, I got it. That was it. Then 18 months later, I was having a very bad time on Blade Runner, and we were previewing. The previews were disaster. Things like, why is it always raining? Why is it always dark? And the ending is depressing. So all in all, it was a disaster. And so the studio, I was being pushed into, we've got to have a happy ending. Don't Americans like a happy ending? Do you like happy ending?
Your ending of Blade Runner is the perfect ending.
Oh, yeah.
They want a happy ending. So I say, what does that mean? He said, well, you know, go to the mountains somewhere, run away forever. I said, well, why do you do that? And if the mountains exist, why do you live in this goddamn awful city? Anyway, I'll do it. Called up Stanley, said, listen, Shining, I know you're in the helicopter for about 6 weeks, right? He said, no, I would never go in a helicopter. He said, but yeah, I was 6 weeks, chopper. I said, can I borrow some of the footage from The Shining for the preview? Cut long story, he said, okay. He gave me, next day I had 17 hours of footage from The Shining. Cut it in. It made the preview much better. I then had to go back to Stanley and say, can I buy it? So The Shining footage is in the first release of Blade Runner from The Shining.
Wow. Unbelievable. Do you know what his Napoleon would have been at all? Like, do you?
No, after, when he passed, about 5 years later, somebody sent me said, do you want to read this? And I read it, but it was Birth to Death.
Oh,
It
interesting.
was the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Oh, wow.
For the record, your Blade Runner is fucking perfect. And I don't know what notes they gave to you of the initial screening, but like.
Yeah, but when you're exhausted having made it, And you get on your knees. I'm on my knees by now. They say I don't like the movie.
Well, time won, and you won in the end.
Well, no, I know. I figured it was special.
It is. It is special.
Yeah.
I know. Just put a timestamp on this interview. You're in the middle of filming Gladiator right now, and that's a movie that went through several different versions of what it was going to be. And to me, one of the most fascinating that it didn't end up being was following Maximus into the afterlife. And I'm just sort of curious if you were ever involved with it at that point, and how much of the Maximus into the afterlife that fascinated you, what that story would have been.
Nick Cave wrote the script, but I had the idea. I knew how to bring him back through a portal back to the real world. I'm not going to tell you what isn't, because somebody will steal it.
So that script is out there somewhere.
Yeah, no, I have it. I talked to Nick every other day for about a month, and as he was writing it. And so I said, we can bring him back this way. And what I want to do is start the film in Styx on the edge of the ocean. And you see him, this warrior wandering in armor there, and it's Maximus wandering, looking for where he's going to go next.
Wow. That's cool.
That's amazing.
Oh.
That's c'est moi.
I want to jump off that because we have a rare opportunity. The last time you were on our show, you were in the middle of getting Napoleon ready to go. You were promoting Last Duel in House of Gucci, and I think you were at your home, and you're like, yeah, I'm working on this movie Napoleon right now with Joaquin Phoenix. And to sit here right now, that as you mentioned, you're getting Gladiator. I know you shot portion of it before the
90 minutes,
right? And you got the edit down to 90, and then you're going to go finish the film. Can you give us some insight into how that works? So you shot what you shot, you edit down to 90, and then are you going to show the cast the 90 to get them back in the vibe? How does it work?
I do that. I'm not going to show anybody anything. No. So I mean, no, because it was such a rare, unusual situation with a gap. That never happens, because normally a director never shows his cut as this is right until he's ready. So you shoot the film, director does his thing, he's editing, I edit during the film. Scorsese doesn't edit till he's finished. I'm cutting as I go, because I like to see where I am. And so right now I've got 90 minutes, but because it's cut together, I'll probably show my lead actor.
Paul?
Yeah. And Pedro, I'll probably show them, see what they got. And Connie.
Denzel can wait.
Well, we are out of time, sir. We thank you so much for coming back onto the show and joining us. We're all huge fans of this movie, and we can't wait to tell people to go see it.
And we are back, which feels extra special because that was just Sir Ridley Scott returning. To say that happened once is crazy. The fact that it happened again, and it's becoming a regular thing perhaps, is pretty astounding. Jake, I was going to ask, do you prefer this one over the first one? But seeing as you didn't really get any questions into the first one, I assume you kind of enjoyed this one more. But
yeah, I did. Well,
how'd you feel?
Not just because he actually answered my questions this time around,
Sure.
but to hear him, I mean, some of the stories he told, look, we love all day talking about Napoleon, but when you get someone like Ridley Scott, when you get any kind of a legendary director, whether it be Ridley Scott or Martin Scorsese or Steven Spielberg, you're more than happy to talk about the film at hand, the film that you're there to talk about. But also, you kind of secretly hope that they play the greatest hits too. You don't mind Paul McCartney, playing his new single he has out, but there's a part of you that really hopes he plays Freebird. Or Blackbird, or no, it's Blackbird. Sorry.
Wait, if he plays Freebird, it'll be an interesting
hearing, take. Not just hearing him tell stories about Alien, not just hearing him tell stories about Blade Runner, but hearing him talk about the influence or his connection to Stanley Kubrick on those, hearing him tell the story about Stanley Kubrick, calling him up and asking about the chestburster scene, hearing about the fact that there is footage of The Shining buried inside Blade Runner because of Stanley Kubrick. It's so cool. To me, those are the sort of moments where you just go, this is why we do what we do. Like, it's this, to be able to hear those sort of stories where if you were to read them online, your mind would be blown and you'd go, God, that's really cool. And you'd send that link to your friends and you'd go, oh my God, listen to this. But to have the man himself sitting in front of you, telling you this story about the time Stanley Kubrick called him to ask questions about Alien, like, what more do you possibly want out of a Ridley Scott interview?
Yeah. And he's such a great, I could see his attitude, I think I talked about it last time he was on, where you're like, he's so straightforward and he's not really concerned about sounding super polite. He's just like, I know this to be true, and I'm not really going to sugarcoat that.
Yeah.
And
it's such a reason to like. I'm not trying to come out and be like, oh, he absolutely loved us. We got very nice compliments from his team after the interview, but I will say that like, he'll tell you when he doesn't like
exactly. Yeah.
So whenever he doesn't, there's a part of you that just goes, okay, maybe we did like. He didn't tell us to go fuck ourselves, so like maybe we must have done something right.
And it's funny, we talk about we, meaning just like people in the industry, people who are paying attention to film, talk about, you know, how old he is now, and he's directing and directing at the scale and such, and how like astounding that is, incredible that is. But let alone, you know, mentioning a junket, like he's been doing, I don't know, I guess when junkets maybe started more in the 80s, but Alien coming out in 79, he's been doing some sort of press talking about movies since 1979.
Yeah, exactly. Like he has, we use this expression a lot for the legends, but he has forgotten more about filmmaking than any of us will ever know. Incredible. And you're right. Like it's at this point, he's 86 years old. It's hard to ask him a question that in some form or fashion he hasn't already been asked. And look, I'm not telling you that every single story we got in this interview, it was the first time he ever told it.
Right.
Impossible. Not going to be the case. But you know what it was the first time? It was the first time he said it to us. And that's, to me, that's what matters.
It's the first time he said it to us, but I will say, to put a cap on all of that, of just how special it is, you're correct that a filmmaker like that, someone who's been around for so long, has answered so many questions. We always talk about the goal being like getting the, ooh, that's a great question, or ooh, like, oh, I've never been asked that, is like the holy grail. For someone like that, that's kind of impossible. But to ask questions that get them engaged and to get the conversation going and to turn it into a conversation, I think that's what we always strive for on the show.
Yeah.
And that's
here's what I'm going to tell you. So I now have the Sean curse.
Well, there's several. What is it?
Yeah, there's so many. This is such a champagne problem, and it's not meant to sound like I'm not appreciative of the opportunities that are given. But like when you get these, sometimes when you get to interview a legend, like I said, you know, you want them to talk about the greatest hits. And there's a part of you that just goes, please, when I ask this question, please don't bring up this one movie that not that many people care about, you know? And most recently, before I sat down with Scorsese, Sean was like, you know, he's going to bring up Silence, right? He's just going to talk about Silence the whole time. And so I asked Scorsese a question about the characters whose soul he's most worried about. And he answered the character. Thank you. He answered the character from Silence. And in the back of my mind, I thought, son of a bitch, Sean. Like, you just had to. And so the other day, I interviewed Jodie Foster.
What did you not want her to bring up?
And Sean was like, you know, she's going to talk about Nell, right?
Nell, okay.
And so I asked her of all the characters, because she's in this film called Naiad, which is all about, you know, a swimmer who has to endure things that are not just physical, but mental as well. So I asked about what is the most mentally grueling role you've ever taken.
And you wanted her to say?
And she said, I was hoping she'd be like something like Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah. And she was like, I was in this movie called Nell. And I was like, God damn it, Sean. So that's my point of saying that, like, and for both of those answers, I got oh, that's a great question. But I would trade getting, oh, that's a great question, for just hearing Ridley Scott tell a Blade Runner or Alien story that he's told for the 1000th time. So it's, you know, it's you can't have your cake and eat it too. But yeah, it was cool hearing him tell those stories.
Well, again, an immense thank you to Sir Ridley himself, to the team at Sony, to everybody who was working the junket, which was in Paris, France, which is amazing, which we talked a little bit about.
Shout out to the entire Sony team there who you know, dealt with had a lot of stuff going on.
And again, bittersweet for the regulars, bittersweet that Kevin and Sean are not here, but I'll say that we will try to find time. I think, you know, as we get towards the end of the year, we're limping our way there. To the end of the year, we've got some fun stuff coming up, but we usually have time for some more breathy, chill episodes. And I think that's a great time for us to look back at this year and take the opportunity with them to talk about, you know, I'm trying to think back. My brain's a mush right now with so much going on.
Nolan, we'll have to talk about Nolan.
I mean, there's so much this year, but we'll get to it. And this is going to be up there. What? This is going to be up there.
We got a ways to go, and
there's still a lot.
Who's to say that other cool stories won't develop.
Yeah, this is true. Well,
that's our really quick way of Gabe and I trying to go, don't say it. Just don't say it. Don't say it. Just don't say it.
Before we sign off, though, I do want the folks at home to hear your review of Napoleon. I have not seen it yet. Sure. We did have a screening, but it was while I was traveling for the shoot that we had. But you have seen it. The movie comes out the day that this is dropping. So this is Thanksgiving week in America. So movies tend to come out on Wednesday rather than Friday in order to hit the sort of, it's that people call it a tradition, but I feel like I don't know anyone that goes to see movies on Thanksgiving. But I know it's like,
I know I know a ton of people that do.
Okay, I know it's a tradition, but I don't know anyone that does it necessarily. But for me, the Thanksgiving holiday is like a full day affair. Like we're like grazing food, hanging out, drinking, playing games, and it's like a whole day. So there's no real time for going to the movies. But you have seen Napoleon. The folks at home are likely going to see Napoleon very soon. We'll stay spoiler free, although I guess it's historical. But let us know what you thought of Joaquin Phoenix as Napoleon in Napoleon.
Honestly, I really love this film. Here's sort of my hang up on it. I do think it's some of the most impressive, incredible, epic, tangible action sequences I have seen put on the big screen in years. Like there's definitely moments where you just go, Jesus, this is Ridley Scott. This is some of the best Ridley Scott wartime action I've ever seen. I mean, there are moments that are just so visceral that like when a cannon hits somebody, I think it's the best cinematic representation of what happens to a person when a cannon hits them. Because so often we see cannons being shot and we see cannons landing, and it usually results in like an explosion in the ground. And we forget oftentimes that like there are a lot of moments where they were aiming for people, and what does that look like when those cannons hit people or a horse or whatever? It's brutal and it's visceral, and those action sequences are incredible. The stuff in between I think is weaker. The more human interaction, the more human drama. And I don't know what the answer is to fix it, because I can't tell. The movie runs 240, and I can't tell if the movie needs to be an hour shorter or an hour longer.
There is a longer.
There is a 4-hour cut, and if you're familiar with Ridley Scott, he is, whether it be famously or infamously, a director whose better version tends to be the director's cut that's coming later. If you've never seen the director's cut of Kingdom of Heaven, it's a stone cold masterpiece.
To step aside, maybe this is a thing that's been well theorized. I don't mean to say that I'm the first one to think this. I do find that interesting. I'm taking a step aside from your review. I think that's because he's first and foremost, and he talks about this, a commercial director. Mm-hmm. Like he talks about like himself as a filmmaker and why he's so good, why him and his brother were so good at the start was, sure, yeah, my first movie is Alien, but I came in with this much commercial experience and I knew how to shoot quickly and I knew what I needed. And I always got the sense that he, with his director's cuts, he was like, yeah, of course, you need something shorter. You're trying to sell a ticket in a theater. Like he always had like the marketing side of it and was like, I will make my art. It'll exist forever. And I felt like that's why we get such strong director's cuts. Cause I assume at some point, if not always, he was very much like, okay, yeah, let's work together to make what we think works in this format, whether you agree with that or not. Yeah. But it just seems to be, that's his motto that's his method is like, here's this version, but you're going to get something. Yeah. Really
because I also think he stopped caring how well his movies do at the box office. Yeah. And I don't really think he cares much for reviews anymore. At this point, I think he just says, listen, I'm going to make the movie I want to make. They'll release whatever version they release in theaters, but my true version will exist however long it takes for you to get it. It wouldn't surprise me if he said that the version of Napoleon that's hitting theaters is not his version. Like by definition of a director's cut, which he endorses and has said that is the better version. And we don't have a release date on that. It is going to come to Apple. So here's what I'll say is that, look, I don't have a background in European history. I took a European history class in high school. But there were multiple moments where I was sort of going, wait, okay, hold on. Who are they fighting? And why are they fighting this country? Like, okay, they're fighting the British. What are you fighting the British for? There were moments where I kind of wanted you to go, okay, wait, hold on, slow down. I need you to sort of explain this to me like I'm 5. Like, wait, I need an explanation of why you're fighting these people. And then on the flip side, there were some moments where I was like, okay, I get it, I got it. All right, let's move on. Let's go. Let's speed this part along. it's still production value. Everything about it is it's so high quality. And especially, and maybe this is, and I'm really not trying to be like the Marvel, knock on Marvel guy right now. And I feel like
there
have
are a lot
been
of
these
them,
past,
so you're not the guy.
Yeah, but like when like it's almost like having a glass of water after drinking nothing but soda for a week. And what I mean by that is just like when you see nothing but like just these almost 99% CGI action sequences. It's not to say that they can't look great. Like they can look, I mean, we've seen what Peter Jackson can do with a CGI action sequence. It can look fantastic. But when you just get to the point where like that's all you're getting anymore, and then all of a sudden you see an action sequence that is real people, real locations, real animals, what looks to be real pain being inflicted, you just go, oh, okay. Like what I think what people were taking for granted for a long time now is just such a refreshing glass of water in the desert that it just like, even though maybe the rest of the movie isn't as great, you have some truly, truly remarkable action sequences that are helping stitch together a lesser tiered dramatic picture. Joaquin Phoenix is fantastic. I think he makes some really interesting choices in that he chooses to play him based on, and it seems to be historically accurate based on what we're hearing about this guy in all the museum tours that we took, a child. He was a grown child and would have these sort of petulant child moments. And I didn't expect that, and I thought it was really great. Vanessa Kirby is, as she always is, fantastic. I think I would have loved, there are a lot of aspects of Josephine, the character who Vanessa Kirby plays, that I would have liked to have seen fleshed out, and it wouldn't surprise me if those are some of the aspects that are added to the 4-hour cut. I would imagine the 4-hour cut isn't necessarily going to be more action, because I can't imagine that they would film big, massive action sequences exactly and then cut them out. I would imagine there's probably the things I'm asking for are the things that are in the 4-hour cut. A little bit more of a nuanced explanation as to who was fighting who and why. And I guarantee you a lot more with Josephine because I did a brief, quick Cliff Notes Wikipedia search on sort of who the two of them were and what their relationship was. And there was so much stuff that was sort of just touched on that, you know, it's.
So would you ultimately, a couple questions for you. Would you ultimately recommend viewers at home?
Oh God, yeah.
Not to watch it, but to maybe do like a primer catch up on the Napoleon story or some of that history, if you feel like that would help.
I think so. I think so. Because I mean, look, I sort of wish that I had, because there's a part of me that going in like, well, I don't really want it spoiled for me, but it's like,
sure, yeah.
Again, like we sort of said at the beginning, it is history, and right. I think. Even if you don't, I mean, I'm not saying you have to read all the way to his death to find out how he died, or, you know, but like at least give yourself a base in terms of like, okay, by the time he named himself emperor or whatever the case may be, like,
right.
Why, and who were they fighting, and why were they fighting the British, and why were they, why, honestly, why was, Marie Antoinette beheaded, and there were so many aspects of it that like it kind of just throws you into the middle of events that are already happening. Like honestly, the where this movie starts is where a lot of other films have ended. So it's kind of assuming like it doesn't really play catch up. There's a quick title card at the beginning, but you're in the thick of it, and you better follow it if you want to sort of kind of at least have any kind of an intellectual investment in what's going on.
Does this, this is interesting because it kind of has a couple connections to Gladiator in that Joaquin Phoenix is returning with Ridley since Gladiator, right? This is the first time.
Yep.
And his next movie is Gladiator 2.
Gladiator 2, yeah, which he touched on and gave us a really interesting insight into what Gladiator 2 was going to be before the script that was what ended up what they're shooting right now.
Does the action in this have you excited to go, okay, he went from this to that, of knowing what Gladiator is going to look like in 2024?
I mean, if anything... Look, however it is you feel about like the story and the more sort of slower dramatic aspects of Napoleon, I don't see anyone walking out of Napoleon and going, oh, he lost it. He doesn't know how to shoot action. Yeah, he's still, the man still got action. And, whenever we were in Rome earlier this year and Kevin and I took a tour of the Colosseum, and they just if you know anything about the Colosseum and that period of time, there are so many aspects of what they did inside those walls that they didn't even touch on in the first Gladiator. And I'm starting to get the impression that he's going to touch on a lot of those things in Gladiator 2. He revealed recently that like there's going to be like this attack of baboons because they used all different kinds of animals in the Colosseum. I think they used a tiger briefly in Gladiator, but there are going to be so many different aspects. And so knowing that he's still got it, and I think he's going to dip his toe into some of the crazier aspects of the Colosseum for Gladiator 2. Also, Gladiator 2 featuring the return of Denzel Washington, who he hasn't worked with since American Gangster.
Wow.
It's it was. I have a feeling it's going to be something special.
Well, folks, it sounds like you need to see Napoleon.
I really would. I hope that the review didn't sound as harsh as I feel like I made it out to be, because it's, if you were to say, is it worth paying to go to the theaters? Unquestionably, absolutely. Like if you're telling yourself, "Oh, I'm just going to wait till, I'm going to wait till I see it at home," you're missing out. You really are.
Yeah. This is the scale of this deserves the big screen. So go check out Napoleon. Again, thank you to Ridley Scott for joining us. And as we said at the top of the show, that is not the last that you're going to see of us this week, because on Friday we are dropping our interview from the same junket with Joaquin Phoenix, returning since his interview for the Joker. Go check that out if you want to hear how that went. One of our all-time great interviews. And he comes in. I'll say this. I don't know if I said this on air. I think I said this before we were recording, but this one felt like, we talk about in the original interview with him where it felt like it took 10 or 15 minutes for him to like really get comfortable and be like, oh, okay, this is this kind of interview. And then he was like super fun and jokey and I hate to use the word normal, but like, just very not as like, we didn't need to be as nervous as the atmosphere made us feel. And with this one, it felt like he sat down and he was already ready to play.
The moment we walked in, because he was standing there by the door when we walked in the room, and we'll tell the story when we get there, but it's a good, you're 100% right. The interview starts out at the level where Joker left off. Honestly, it's the perfect metaphor for a sequel. Like where part one leaves off, part two picks up right there.
Now we got to get him for, what's Joker 2 called? Folie à deux? What's the?
I wouldn't look. I've butchered enough French.
French as well. I was gonna say.
I've butchered enough French this past week that I really don't need to do anymore.
All right, well, folks, thank you for tuning in. You can find me at Gabe Kovach, Jake at Jake's Takes, at Kevin McCarthy TV, at Sean_O'Connell, and the show is at ReelBlend. But until next time, which is going to be Friday. Come on back. Tell your friends. Hit subscribe if you haven't. What are we in now?
Well, I'm just going to say that thank you for paying your artist. Well done.
Yeah, thanks for paying your artist. Yeah, well done.
We appreciate you.
The check's cleared.
Yeah.